Welcome to Sight and Scene, the podcast where technology meets terrain and insights transform our understanding of the world. Hosted by industry experts with decades of experience, Sight and Scene dives into the cutting-edge tools and techniques reshaping how we visualize, map, and interact with the spaces around us.
In each episode, we explore the latest advancements in drones, GIS, CAD, geomatics, and scanning, showcasing applications not just in the built environment, but across a spectrum of industries, from environmental monitoring to urban development and beyond. We bring you stories from the field and interviews with fascinating people on the cutting edge of geospatial technology.
Sight and Scene.
Good quality data
Right.
and lots of it builds such a rich story that becomes extremely valuable. So the more quality data that you have on a particular asset or subject, the more valuable it becomes. Scott, good to see you, bud.
Perfect.
How you doing?
Doing good. It's been busy
Yeah.
as ever, which is great, but I'm enjoying it. It's been quite a packed holiday season so far.
Yeah, I've enjoyed talking to you over the last couple of weeks and just hearing about everything you're up to. And, you know, I know it's usually the time of year where things slow down and people settle in a little bit and you're cranking. So that's really good to hear.
I think we're just talking about that. It's either been feast or famine for the holidays. Either everyone slows down and nobody wants anything, or it's this and everyone has a December 31st deadline.
Yeah. I was actually listening to another podcast and they were talking to a bunch of folks in our industry as well. And one of the guests said is, as a self-employed entrepreneur, you have to be okay with the dips and the ebbs and the flows of the workflow, because you have to be comfortable with that. And, you know, that's not easy for everybody.
Yeah. And it's just an interesting thing. Just a quick note on that. I think even when you scale really big, that is a possibility, because I'm working with a very, very large manned aircraft company, and they just kind of let me know their scanners, they send them for maintenance through most of the winter. Right. So we're just talking about timing on certain projects, and it's the downtime for their stuff. So that is when everything goes into the garage and gets repaired and looked at and checked and calibrated. So I thought that was really
Telling
interesting.
their clients that, it'll be springtime before we get to you.
Yeah. And it makes perfect sense, because it's like when you have your slow time, you improve your offerings and your operations.
Yeah. Maintenance, calibration, business development. So I think we're both spending a lot of time in those areas, and it's fun. You know, I need to deprogram myself a little bit to this, you know, our conditioning of this 9 to 5 mentality, or I should say in construction, this 6 to 6. You know, I had a manager at one point who said, there's 120 work hours in a week and I only expect you to work half. And that's a pretty common theme in the industry. It's, you know, you got to follow the project, and it's hard sometimes to find those breaks in between, but we all need it. And I think wintertime is a good time to reflect on that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, we're episode 2, and we're trying to get a few of these in the can, so to speak. I know that's a film term, but try to get some of these in the can so we could release them here in the new year. So for those listening, we're excited to be coming at you with episode 2. We got lots of fun stuff to talk about today. We're focusing on who uses reality capture, how is it used, talk about some use cases, and what the future holds with reality capture. So there's going to be lots of good nuggets in here, continuing to lay the foundation for this podcast, so folks get a really good idea of what we're going to be talking about and the themes of upcoming episodes. So really, you got just building on this foundation. So hopefully folks get a lot of good information out of today. But before we jump in, you know, we've been kicking back and forth some ideas about a segment piece that we want to include in every episode, because it seems like that's a formula for a lot of podcasts. And I know it's engaging for me when folks reveal a little more about either their guests or themselves, or just some fun facts. So we're starting in, and just today it's Scott and I, obviously, and when we have our guests, we'll also get some good information and input from them. But we wanted to create an artist choice, couple categories where either share a fun fact about the region or the city that you're from, or share a historical bit of information from your region or city that has had a broader impact on the rest of the country or the world. So something that happened in your area that's like, wow, that had huge implications and rippled across a larger area. So kind of, I think it'll be fun to dive into that. And I definitely have mine ready to go. Scott, I don't know if you're ready, if you want me to kick it off, and you can see what I bring at you.
Yeah, you start first. I have one though, which is so ready for it.
I'm a bit of a geology nerd. As a young kid, I was born in 1975. So as a young kid, seeing Mount St. Helens on the TV, all the lead up to the eruption of St. Helens, and it was very impactful for a little kid growing up in the Midwest, in the cornfields of the Midwest, and seeing these huge volcanoes, and it was so captivating for me. So I always had this draw to the Pacific Northwest, and it took to my gosh, I've been here 10 years now. So it took a while to finally land here in the Pacific Northwest as the place I reside. But the love of geology has never escaped me. I actually was a geology major for the first half of my college career, and then I switched over to construction management and architecture, and hence why that fifth year was that bonus year to get all that in. But anyway, something I've been geeking out on a little bit lately is some of the geologic history here. And this could be a whole podcast, but we're not a geology podcast, and we're reality capture podcast, but it does speak to the land and geophysics and just the broader mapping community and all the things that I think people are really engaged and excited about in this community. So I wanted to share about the Missoula floods. Are you familiar with the Missoula floods?
I am not. So
okay.
This is perfect. Lay it on me.
All right. Good. And maybe I'll preface this with people that are interested in geology and volcanism and all of that. Check out the Pacific Northwest, and particularly the Columbia Basin and the Portland Basin, and this whole region. The things that shape this region are just incredible geologic history here in the Pacific Northwest. But the Missoula floods, much more recent in the time scale, and there's a lake in Montana called Flathead Lake, and it's this huge basin that in the glacial periods there's a ridge that's on the western flank of this large valley. Huge. I mean, Flathead Lake right now is a huge lake, and this gap in this ridge would get plugged by the glaciers encroaching down into the northern part of the Pacific Northwest, and it would plug this gap, and this entire valley would fill up with trillions and trillions of gallons of water. And then you would have these periods of recession of the glaciers, and it just would oscillate back and forth. And every time this happened, the plug would break and open up, and trillions. At the time, this lake was the largest freshwater lake in the world, and all of that would come rushing out down through eastern Washington, down into the Columbia gorge areas, and it would bring trillions of gallons of water and scour the landscape all the way down the Columbia, all the way into the Portland Basin. And imagine sitting here in Portland with hundreds of feet of floodwaters rushing in with huge boulders and sediment and just pieces of glaciers, cataclysmic. And this happened 40 times in the last 20,000 years. So the makeup of our soil, and always being in the building industry here, you're always working with geotechs, and it's fascinating to see where all of these different flood deposits, there's these very distinct lines through the Portland region and the whole Columbia Basin that shows where each of these floods deposited its it's aggregates, because depending on how big the flood, there's bigger aggregates, and how less of a flood, like how recent it broke or what have you. So it is cataclysmic events here in the Pacific Northwest, and again, very recent. So to me, fascinating story. So if you don't know about that, check it out. It's really cool.
That is very interesting. I never heard of that, and it's crazy not hearing about something like that, but how impactful it is, right? Like that's such 40 times. That's crazy. You think like a couple of times is big enough.
Right.
But very cool.
Yeah, there's some really great YouTube lectures and content around it. I mean, you could spend days, but
it's perfect. And even though you say we're not a geology podcast, it is interesting because I'm sure we'll get into this later, but I find you end up being experts in some of like this other ancillary stuff, because when people come to us for like reality capture services, it's not always like, just give me something like a point cloud or a scan. That you kind of need to know what your client, like what the business that your client is in. You need to know a little more in depth. So if you're doing drones for, sediment or erosion, you probably need to know a little bit of that. So
that's a good point. Yeah. And the maps. Sorry, I get so excited about this stuff.
Go for it.
The maps. The maps that have been produced. The maps that have been produced to show some of these changes through the Pacific Northwest and all the volcanic activity and the times of the big basalt flows where it buried the Columbia Basin in 3.5 miles thick of lava flows. I mean, it's pretty cool stuff. Sorry. All right. I regress.
Awesome.
Digress.
Cool. Well, so my fun fact is nowhere near that cool. I'll just start with, but it is a fun fact. And I think like where we're at and where we come from is maybe the theme here, because I picked a similar one from my area. I've born and raised around the tri-state New York City area my whole life and still live here. So we were talking about this. Maybe it's because a lot of my recent clients have been involved in like stream monitoring and stuff like that. But my fun fact is that New York City has the country's largest unfiltered water supply. Right, so it is chlorinated, but it is not filtered through the usual means that most other water supplies are. And not only is that a testament to the water quality, but it's very interesting because it's not the city just saying, okay, our water is so good we can get away with it, or we don't feel like filtering it. They have to do so much more testing. There are all of these EPA things they have to do and all of this management they have to do to prove every single year that they don't need to filter it. So it's a very interesting thing because it's not like the burden is off of them necessarily. There's more they have to do, but it's a point of pride for all the water management people in New York City. It also it ties into geology as well. It's just where we get our that we get our water from, upstate glacial sources. So just a very interesting one I came across, and that's New York City for you. You talk to anybody here and somebody will brag about the drinking water. I don't know what it is. I don't know why. It's because we don't have much else to brag about. We have traffic. It's noisy, but water's pretty good.
That is amazing that when you don't think of that when you think of New York, like clean water with all of the industry, with all of the development. That is a source of pride. I think that's really, really cool. And maybe we should have stack up Portland's water supply to New York's, because we get ours from this reservoir up that filters through an old growth forest. So, we got to do it Pacific Northwest style, but that's really cool to hear about New York, that many millions of people have some of the best drinking water in the country. So very cool. Very cool. Okay. Let's get into the subject for today. So again, we're talking about just who uses reality capture, how it's used. So I thought it would be good to redefine. We talked about it in the first episode a little bit, what our definition of reality capture is, but in case you're joining us for the first time, it would be good to give our own perspectives of what reality capture is. Scott, what do you got?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just to kind of sum it up and maybe even give a bit of a new take on it, it is, to me, the idea of just measuring up as much as possible. It's really getting as big a picture in terms of measurements as you want. Now, it goes beyond that, but at least in my line of work, that's usually what someone wants. And you can see how broad that is, because that's anything from, maybe I want to make a measurement that's a count. Maybe I want to see how many feet of pipe work or duct work I have in a building. But a measurement can be a topographic contour as well, right? I want to see how my terrain works and see how steep it is.
Yep.
I usually, in my business, at least in my world, it's some kind of measurement, but it is as broad as you can get in the world of measurements. And as
great.
you can guess, that's a lot of people that are affected by that.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I like to think of reality capture as digitizing our world in a way that provides actionable data. So thinking about 3-dimensional data, I always like it's old adage, a picture's worth 1,000 words. I like to think about reality capture being this digitization and having a 3-dimensional, extremely accurate recreation of whatever that asset, whatever that land, whatever that building, whatever that thing that you're scanning is, becomes extremely valuable in the digital world, where people from all corners of the globe can jump on a computer and verify and validate things and measure and analyze. So to me, it is worth millions of words. The picture is 1,000. A 3D model that you can measure from is far, far more valuable. And the amount of data being collected today, I feel there's a direct correlation between obviously the quality and the quantity of data. Good quality data, right, and lots of it builds such a rich story that becomes extremely valuable. So the more quality data that you have on a particular asset or subject, the more valuable it becomes. So that to me is the exciting part of reality capture, and what people are starting to wrap their heads around is how they can use this information for their business. And we're not just talking about builders and architects and engineers, it's building owners, it's all the people that use it. We're going to talk about that here in a second. So actually that's what we're talking about next, is who really benefits from reality capture, or who doesn't benefit, because it could be used by so many people in industries. It's just not a household term yet, but I feel like we're headed that way. So who are and this could be related to a lot of the folks that you're working with in your clientele, but who do you find benefits from reality capture, Scott?
Yeah. So to start off with that, and I'm glad you mentioned who benefits versus who doesn't, because we'll get into that with the who doesn't. It's an interesting point. But to start off with, the usual suspects, as I like to call them, are like the architects, the engineers, and the contractors, right? So construction and design professionals. In my world, that's most of who I am working with. And I would say that this group of people is like well primed for reality capture, because it's kind of a easy transition for most of them from what they've been working with before. I like to mention, before I was doing laser scanning, back when I was an MEP engineer, I was walking through spaces with laser measuring tape and pen and paper drawing floor plans, just, stack the laser measuring tape against one wall, hit the button, get your wall to wall distance, and just do that over and over. Yeah, very, very efficient. All day on a site, but that's what you do when you're the junior engineer and your billing rate is the cheapest out of everybody. So, and we can talk about that mentality as well, and how that's changing, or just how that's different. But it is reality. It was reality capture, right? A very coarse, maybe a very simplified version of reality capture, but it absolutely was, because that was going in to create the floor plans that were the basis of design and as-built and all of the things we deliver. And I'm always a big take it back to basics kind of person with this stuff. And the architects, engineers, and construction professionals are very good at the basics. Right? They have that foundation of, well, I've always been making floor plans, or I've always been working with floor plans. So it's kind of a magnifying, it's kind of a like a productivity boost to them. But in many ways, it's opening new deliverables, but it just feels like a natural extension, natural growth of what they're doing. And that's why I think you see the AEC space is so hot, because they're the most warmed up to reality capture already. But
Create 100%.
And I could go on. Yeah. And I could go on and on about architects, engineers, contractors, but just for the sake of who benefits and who doesn't, that bleeds into other stuff too, right? It's bleeding into more of the, let's just say, like the non-technical roles, like the property manager and building owners there, people who like maybe have read a floor plan before and can work their way around it, but don't work with it every single day. And that's where the new exciting stuff is happening to me, because especially the interplay of architects, engineers to the property managers, reality capture is giving all of those folks new ways to position and display the properties to their clients, who are the property owners. So that's where I see a lot of the new stuff happening here. Reality capture is a way for someone who doesn't know how to read a floor plan, who doesn't know how to interpret, an elevation section drawing or something like that, in a much more digestible way, right? Because it more closely approximates the real world. It's like looking at a Lego set or a model instead of looking at floor plans. And I think everybody who looks at like a little model in a museum or something can relate to how entertaining that is and how enjoyable that is to look at.
Yeah. Dropping people in a 3D model with a VR headset on, it's been today's reality for a few years now.
Exactly. Exactly.
For those people that don't see two-dimensional, they don't have that spatial practice that a lot of the AEC industry has. It's an invaluable tool to help folks see the as-built conditions, or start to understand, and again, playing off what you were saying with the building owners, like operations and maintenance, how they can use this information to train staff. They can use it for obviously maintenance and logistical. It's just such a powerful tool that more and more I'm seeing a lot of contractors hand over their O&M manuals with lots of reality capture components included in that. And those O&M manuals, I got to tell you, as a 26-year contractor, those things those were the things you gave to the junior person, right? Like, oh, you got to put this thing together because you're collecting all of the submittals. It's a lot of work. And then you put it into a PDF, you organize it, you hyperlink everything, you make it sweet, and then you give it to the owner, and then the owner still calls you every week because they just don't want to look, they want to call you instead of look at the manual. So I think the more intuitive these manuals become in a 3D sense, that they're alleviating some of those touch points on the end, which, those touch points aren't a bad thing, because I think it's always good for the contractor and the design team to stay in touch with these clients, understand what's working well, what's not, because that's good feedback into the whole improvement process of building. So, not to discount that or say we don't want to talk to any owners afterwards, because that's an important piece of it. But giving them an intuitive way to digest their building and interact with it in a digital sense is something that is becoming more and more of a thing. A few others that I'm thinking of as well. We're touching on these building owners, but private institutions, whether it's universities or some sort of institutional campus, whether it's senior living, anyone who's managing a large portfolio of buildings that needs to digitize their campus for, it could be a number of things, layering into GIS systems and tracking. And we touched on that the first episode about how GIS is becoming much more intuitive for non-government agencies to leverage the power of that tool. But agriculture, huge, tons and tons of reality capture in agriculture, and how people are using all of these different tools to improve their precision agriculture. Archaeology, I mean, not a lot of people think about archaeology, but drones in particular are having a big impact on archaeological studies and helping map areas that are covered with tons of detritus, and you could get heat signatures from thermal drones. So lots of ways that archaeologists are preserving sites and documenting and validating and all of that. What else? We talked about property management, the energy industry. Holy cow! Yep. The energy industry has taken reality capture, and I would say they're right up there with the AEC industry, if not beyond, because they got lots of money there, and they are pushing the forefront. I think they're driving a lot of the innovation in the industry with bringing the reality capture to their manufacture. Their facilities. They have really expensive assets, whether it's power lines strung across a sensitive area, and in light of all of the forest fires in California and potential danger from the electrical grid, there's so many use cases in the energy industry for reality capture.
Absolutely.
Manufacturing, we could go on and on, but there's forestry, so many use cases. I want to kick it back to you, Scott, see if you have any other thoughts or folks that are.
I actually, you touched upon something when you're talking about the building owners that I think is really great to highlight. And that's, you kind of mentioned folks who don't have like the spatial reasoning or like the spatial kind of idea worked in their mind to read a floor plan. And I actually think that's a huge part of it, regardless of what industry you're in, because reading like a GIS map or a floor plan or something like that, I liken it to like knowing programming code, right? Can you learn it? Absolutely. But is it something that you inherently know the day you're born? No. And it's also, it's something that you either practice and get good at. So show an architect a floor plan or elevation, they'll almost definitely be able to do that. But show that to somebody whose job isn't 9-to-5 architect, and they may struggle with that a bit. And so to me, reality capture is the floor plans, like the same way that like the graphical user interface revolutionized computers. Everybody knows how to use Excel, right? Like the amount of people that use Excel is incredible because no one has to code a spreadsheet from scratch. And I think it is almost the exact same way when it comes to scans and models and this stuff versus floor plans. You don't have to know how
Excel. Sorry, I would say Excel is probably one of the greatest software programs ever made.
No, exactly. And so that's the idea, right? Like it's so widespread because it's easy to use. So the reason why Excel has been so popular is its simplicity and it's digestible. It's a powerful tool, but it's like anybody can use it because the buttons are simple. You see what you get, and you don't need to have this deep layer of like this sub layer of knowing, well, I have to craft a table from absolute scratch with programming code. So works the exact same way.
On Excel.
I'm sure you've seen it. Exactly. And it's very, very similar. You show somebody their site in a 3D model reality capture on like a cloud site, or even a model from Revit or SketchUp versus those floor plans, and you usually see them go like, wow. I mean, you've shown people probably point clouds and scans, and they're like, this is my site. Like, this is exactly how it looks. And you just don't get that with floor plans because there's not that immediate connection of what you see is what you get. For point clouds and this reality capture data, there is. You look at it and you're like, that's close enough to what I see in the real world when I go into my building that connection is made. And that's super exciting because then like now the fun stuff can begin, and it's a very usable format.
Yeah, something we're really touching on here is the difference between, with reality capture, the technical user of reality capture and the non-technical user of reality capture. And we've been dancing between both of those as we've run through some of the folks that do benefit. And I think we should definitely talk more about that. And maybe that can be shaped in who doesn't benefit from reality capture. I know you had some thoughts on that.
Yep. Yeah, and that's kind of where this goes into technical versus non-technical, but also just different clients and where they're at. We kind of talked about this as like, just like people have different personalities, companies and groups of people have different aptitudes or different, let's say like different, aptitude might be the right word, for playing around with like this heavy geospatial or reality capture data. Not to go so black and white on this, but I often do find that my clients are in one of two categories. They either are, and these can be the same clients, but it depends on the time, the season, and how busy they are. But clients can often be in one of two modes. One of them is what I call like downtime, exploratory mode, an area where they are absolutely willing to look at this point cloud and look at this data and just, they're trying to just see all the possibilities they can do with it. That's like where you have a mesh model open, or maybe a Revit file or a SketchUp file, and your client's just going through this and saying, wow, like, I can make floor plans off this, or I can count how many pumps I have, or something like that. They're completely exploring the possibilities, and you kind of see the light bulb is going off, and it's the what can I do with this questions that are being asked. That's one side.
And then can I jump in there too?
Of course. Yeah.
Because this is an extremely important part. I find working with clients, when you show them the possibilities, I feel like we both know, we know quite a bit about what the potential of these tools are in the industries that we're working in, but it never fails. You are working with a client who's a specialist in something, and it's just not on your radar how they could use that reality capture data. And they're like, oh, we could use it for this and that and this. You're like, wow, that's a great idea. Exactly. And I feel like we bring a lot of that, that energy to these engagements and show them the possibilities and watch to see what they do with it. That to me is so exciting when you see folks in this exploratory mode and the curiosity is there on what else can we do with this. And I think the industry as a whole is really, I wouldn't say scratching the surface, but they're really diving deeper into what these tools and these deliverables can do, because there's so much untapped potential still with reality capture. And I love that part of the business, is helping people flush these use cases out.
Absolutely. And it's such it's the time and the season that's so ripe for opportunities. It's almost like that's like growth mode. Like, what can we do? What's available? What are the possibilities? But I do like to talk about like the other side of the spectrum, if we're considering it that. And that is, maybe the right way to call it is execute mode, where there's a time crunch, or something is very prescriptively spelled out, or there are some real constraints on a client organization's time, money, or, we're running out of time, we're running out of money on something. And that is the attitude of, I'll use GIS as an example. Someone saying, I just want 1 foot contours. I don't want to look at a point cloud. I could care less. I don't even care how you do it. Drone, who cares? 1 foot contours. We have to deliver that by, X date. And that's it. They want clean, the best 1 foot contours they can get. And that is usually driven by either there's a prescriptive element to it, where my client's client only needs 1 foot contours, and they've just spelled it out very black and white. Or it's just, again, can be just like certain pressures on projects, or just sometimes that's just how clients operate. You have clients and that's all they do. If they're in just one business and they execute very well at that, then that's what they want. And so sometimes this is where it's like, okay, you could say that they don't benefit from reality capture data, but the key of it is they do, but they don't want to see it. They don't want to see it. And it's kind of like, same thing, right? If I'm ordering a pizza, you don't have to show me the oven. You don't have to show me and tell me what temperature you're cranking it up to and all of that. There is a time where it's like, I just want to order a slice, right? So just give me the slice,
450 degrees.
Bring me up. And yeah, exactly. And I think about that a lot, where sometimes I'm guilty of this. I love explaining, if you couldn't guess, as much as possible to the level of detail that, as far as we can go. And that's sometimes just not the right strategy there. The right strategy is to just, give the customer what they want. And yes, internally that reality capture is absolutely making it cheaper, faster. It's the way you do it. But they just need to see the curtain open and the pizza comes out.
Right. Yeah. I was listening to another podcast recently, and one of the questions was, do you find how much educating of your clients do you do? And I think the response was not a lot, because it doesn't pay well. And I was like, okay, that's one way to look at it. And there's some credence to that. But on the other hand, my opinion is if you engage with somebody who is curious to a point where they want to see what else can be done, or you're in a trust building part of your relationship with a client, I think that learning and educating piece is a trust building exercise. And it's an important part of it, that someone not only understands how you get from point A to point B, and they don't need to know every minutia, every little, they don't need to get so far into the weeds, but give enough of a picture of how we get here and the tools. To me, it helps validate some of the value in what we do and the deliverables that we provide. So I think that's an important piece of just building those relationships. But,
Totally.
On the flip side of that, I totally get it too. It's like, I'm going to spend 2 hours explaining something to somebody and they don't really care. Then it's like, well, crap, it's,
yeah.
You got your pizza. Go chow down.
Exactly. I think an important thing that I want to stress here too is, I don't want to make it sound like it's like, okay, some clients are always like that and other clients are always like this. It really is like, it is a spectrum. It is a environmental kind of thing, or a project by project thing, because I've had clients who start in that mode, let's say execute mode. The relationship started by giving them the pizza or the thing. And it was because they were in a big rush and they were making calls to anybody around them, a business who could do whatever they needed, and say they call Harkin and we get them what they want. Well, once that's done and that's delivered, and we just did the, kind of keep quiet and deliver the deliverable, often in the downtime, those same clients come back and say, yeah, we're talking and now we actually want to know how you made that thing or how that works. So clients can pass between these modes at any given time. And my goal often is to find the time, right? Just know when to be in execution mode and when to be in growth explore mode, and just feel that out with a client, because ideally we'd get them more towards growth explore mode, once things are settled, so that we can execute on new types of projects.
Yeah. One thing that's related to this, and maybe just a quick pro business tip for you aspiring folks out there, is if you're handing over deliverables, don't rush to send the invoice for that work. Make sure that they do understand the data and that they're happy with it, and that you've satisfied your commitment for that thing. Then send an invoice. Because sometimes you're like, work is done, here's your invoice. People are like, well, I don't feel like I'm done. I don't really understand ABC. So little pro tip there. Yeah. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about the tools. What are the tools that produce reality?
Oh man,
how are we producing reality with the tools? Sometimes I think I get a good radio voice.
There you go. Exactly. Yeah.
Gotta bring it low.
The tools are many, right? I mean, you can almost I could write pages and pages of lists if we went into every little thing. But let's talk about like just a basic overview of the whole thing. And maybe it's kind of like, I find it's good to start with the simplest one, or maybe the most well-known one, and then we'll kind of dive our way into the maybe the lesser known ones or the more niche ones. So to start with, cameras, right? Probably the most well-known one. It's the one that everyone's used, probably, I'd say most of the population, right, is taking a picture. This is one that this is always a great place to start. We're talking about just pictures of an issue, right? Maybe they're organized by their location, but just simple photos. And this also includes 360 cameras, which are getting more and more popular. they're getting more and more
Oh, yeah.
popular because it's just a camera that sees more things, right? It looks in all directions, but it still takes a JPEG photo or, you know, an MP4 video. And I joke of like, my parents can open those, right? Like I can send that
Yeah.
to literally anyone I know and they could figure out how to open it likely. And that's why it's so
it
popular.
transports you to that space too. It's way
Yes.
more immersive of an experience than just a static photo of, you know, your field of view is, you know, 100 degrees or whatever that might be. So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, one thing I'll say
And-
about the cameras too is just in my progression through the construction over the last 26 years, the rigor and process around photos, like how they're documented, when they're documented, how they're organized, how they're referenced, that became much more refined over the decades and the years, as opposed to just like, oh, let's snap a few photos and hey, did we get a photo of that before we hung drywall? Maybe, I think. Here, let's dig through all these folders, and 4 hours later you're just cursing. You're cursing like, why didn't I do that better the first time around? So that has
that's
come a
great
long
point.
long way. Yeah
It's funny because like I think that's almost it's a really good point here of like that's something that most people have wrapped their head around it. It's not only that they know how to open a photo, but yeah, there's some process behind that and there's some organization behind that, where not only do people in the construction industry know how to look at a photo, they're used to organizing them. They're actually used to working with that data on a regular basis.
Right.
So that's a great point.
Yeah.
It's like you can almost say cameras, like we're over the line with cameras. People know how to use cameras, people know how to organize that.
Yeah.
Moving
and for
on
those
to,
that don't,
yeah,
Scott and I are always happy to, you know, jump on a call with you and be like, hey, here's some processes that work really well with how you get the most out of your photo and 360 photo capture. So definitely,
absolutely.
Always want to keep these things fresh, that if folks have questions or thoughts or ideas and want to talk to us, then give us a shout.
Totally. And speaking of give us a shout and like what we know what to do, the next one is drones. And I would say that's the one that's near and dear to my heart. And that's pretty still much the new kid on the block. I mean, now that
The
industry
gateway
has
drug of reality capture.
Yeah, it totally is. It totally is. And drones are so interesting, and gateway drug is the right way to put it because they can start simple. They can start with just photos of a site. When I'm starting with a new client or a new customer who is just looking to do drone services, but they're like, what can they do? What do you use a drone for? Photos of your site, just basic aerials. It's the number one, in the same exact reason that people can look at that photo, maybe like a time lapse, for example, like a photo taken in over a period of time in the same location, and you're just watching your project literally come together visually. So that stuff is great. And photo and video are the just really like the pinnacle of drone technology, because you really can digest that very well. But drones open up a bunch of stuff. Absolutely. And I'm amazed at how ubiquitous it is becoming. I mean, it's actually not something that I do in my day-to-day too much, just not a service we've been doing much. But when I'm on LinkedIn and I'm looking online, and the amount of small, like let's say drone companies that are on major projects and all they're doing is time-lapse photo construction progress, it's pretty incredible. I have no data to support this, so take this with a huge grain of salt. But I would almost say that time-lapse photo and video is maybe the most requested drone deliverable, just from my basic survey of LinkedIn. It is just the one I am seeing the most people doing and the most people requesting.
Yeah, I want to maybe a quick plug here, because I've worked on many jobs where there's a crane, or they've mounted a webcam up on an adjacent building where they're documenting the job site with this cam. And there's a lot of good companies out there that have these integrations with some of the more popular construction softwares like Procore and Autodesk Construction Cloud, and that they can have have this readily accessible. And at first I was like, oh man, that takes away the potential for the drone aerials. But I've I've found another way to bring the value of that back by doing these hyperlapse orbits over a site. And you could do, there's a whole way, there's a way to do this that works really well, where you're taking multiple photos, moving the drone really slow in this circular orbit, and then you stitch together all of these orbit hyperlapses of a site. And it just taking that static photo from your webcam into this more fluid, dynamic view of a site is still very powerful. And maybe less of it's more of a wow factor, and it could be really important for the client and some of the stakeholders of a project, or maybe they're in a fundraising phase of a project and they need some more of this type of content to help drum up, more interest or what have you. So I wanted to throw that out there, because for folks that do work on larger jobs where you think, hey, maybe there's, the door is shut on that because they have a webcam mounted on the job, I still think there's opportunities there to use the drone to bring value to the project team.
That's such a great point, because something about cameras and drones especially is, while the capture may seem simple, and I've been extolling the benefits of why you want it to be simple, you can also derive these more like involved products from it, like these hyperlapses, right? Which do take a skilled person to put together and execute and do all of that. It isn't just like pop up real quick. That's something you want a service provider to do, for example, often more than in-house, because it's just that little extra something that takes some time to do. But it's done with standard stuff, right? It's still done with cameras and videos. So it is that cool mix of, it is still easily digestible, but it's now you're pushing the limit of the technology and what it can do. And I totally agree. There is nothing like a drone hyperlapse. You cannot swing a crane or walk around an entire site with that same combination of like speed and time that a hyperlapse does. And you're a client and you put a trailer or some video together for your clients, or you're pitching something and you run that hyperlapse. It looks like $1 million, right? It always just feels like this Hollywood level production, and yet it's so accessible, right? Anyone can do it by having a drone pilot, by having by having you, Mike, by having you come out,
right?
Going in and doing it.
We're definitely talking to this marketing piece of it, because I feel like maybe that's more of a marketing tool or type of deliverable, but nonetheless, it's something that takes more effort. And I don't know how many contractors I've talked to are like, we have our own drone. I'm like, that's great. And usually I'm not like, well, do you have your part 107 or do you, I don't go there.
That's a whole story.
Often, that's a whole nother story, but a lot of them do, but many don't as well. And depending on how they're using it, and are they really getting the most out of that tool for their marketing efforts? And there's a lot more that can be done. So I think we could probably leave it at that.
Yeah. Great episode for the future. Licensing and regulation, all of that. Let's jump into the next let's say down into the more niche but still pretty widely used. And I'm going to lump these two in a little bit just because it's a natural jump from cameras. You have photogrammetry, right? But let's also say on top of photogrammetry, we're talking about lidar, right? We're talking about these 3D kind of deliverables that go just a bit deeper into the data than photos do. Now, even though photogrammetry takes pictures from photos, so yes, it uses cameras, it's still more of a process to actually grab a 3D model out of it. And likewise, lidar is a completely different sensor, right? It's firing lasers and capturing actual 3D data actively from the sky on a drone, let's say, or from the ground if it's mobile. And its deliverable is a point cloud, right? Or what it creates is a point cloud. Now, these are really interesting because this is where measurement starts to happen. Right? It's not just qualitative, let me see how my building is going up or how my project is coming together. But now it's this quantitative, let me measure the slope or the grading of my terrain, of my project. So this is really, really getting just more deeper into it. The cost for these goes up, right? Now we're talking about truly professional grade drones and scanners, and this can be much more of a significant hardware investment. And so it does tend to be more specialized. This is something that either, if it's being done in-house, they're really going after it. I don't think I've yet seen a casual drone lidar user. We're getting there, actually. It was interesting, but still it's a bit of a dedication to like actually acquire the hardware, get the training, set that stuff up.
I'd be curious to hear what your definition of a casual lidar user is.
Yeah. I mean, it's out there more and more. Just to put a pin on that, we're starting to see lidar becoming ubiquitous enough that groups who have no interest to process or be in like the lidar business, right, start to use it. I'm gonna, no sponsorship here, but I gotta give DJI and like the L1 scanner credit here. This is those things are at a price point and like a quality balance where I'm starting to see groups that, okay, maybe you're like a construction grading company, or you're in the forestry business. You've never ever considered using lidar before. That was always a really expensive thing that either was done by the state and taxpayer funded, or you put together a huge lump of money to do several projects at once from a manned aircraft provider. Now, in the same way where people can run around with their cameras and stuff like that, you're starting to see companies like forestry companies come up and they say, oh yeah, we bought a drone, we bought lidar, and we're collecting that data. And, it's just the first part in a process that has nothing to do with processing lidar. They're getting the point cloud, yes, but like they're just, once they get the point cloud, they're moving on to other measurements or other stuff. So very interesting. And I think that'll start to be, I think as lidar just gets better and better and cheaper, it will start to reach that point. Maybe another great example is public safety. I'm starting to see like public safety and mobile scanning become more of a thing. And that's a great example of, public safety people are not creating site surveys and floor plans and stuff. They're just trying to get a few measurements from the data and moving on to the rest of the job that they have to do.
Situational awareness, part of, not all scanning is related to we're designing something or we're building something. It could very much be a contextual use case for coordination, collaboration, lots of different ways that people are using that type of data. One thing I wanted to clarify too is that, we were talking about the camera drones and the hyperlapses. Camera drones, when I say camera drones, like a drone that's just capturing normal photos, can also produce point clouds. And we can dive deeper into some of these in later episodes, but I want to make sure that we're clarifying with regular drones. There's a lot that can be done with a camera or RGB drone that still provides similar deliverables that a LiDAR sensor does. But there's definitely distinguishing factors that LiDAR gives you. And namely, one of the things you mentioned was just it's a direct measurement tool, right? It is shooting a laser beam and it's bouncing back and it's getting a direct measurement, whereas photogrammetry is extracted from a mathematical process of different photos and complicated software. And frankly, I think a little bit of magic, but it's different, but you get similar deliverables. So just for folks that might be tuning in that aren't up to their necks in this stuff like we are, and I want to make sure that we're speaking to people too who maybe are just getting into this and have a drone. They're like, oh, well, I do have a drone that's pretty capable. Can I do a point cloud? Yes. Yeah. Well, it depends.
Yeah.
It depends on a lot of things, but
it does depend. But maybe that's a great point. And this is kind of why we called it a gateway drug, right? Because drones are kind of the transition point. You can make a model with a drone, and the quality of that model will depend on the camera and all of that stuff you have. But absolutely, I'm amazed at how many people buy like a DJI Mini or, one of the the Mavic Air, and one of these, let's just like wholly consumer grade drones, and you can still make point clouds and a model out of it. Now, are they going to be perfect and good for a survey? Probably not, but you're looking to check the slope on your roof, for example, right? Just take a quick slope measurement or a basic square footage of your roof. That's the stuff. I'm amazed at how many people I've seen that bought a drone, put it into some quick photogrammetry software, and got the result they needed. And they're not highly trained photogrammetry technicians. But it opens up the possibility and the opportunity to go further there, right? And it is the same. Photogrammetry is almost like easy to do, hard to master. It's kind of one of those things where you can get quick results.
Yeah.
Quick results out of it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of variables too to what that goes into what makes a good or accurate photogrammetric model, and some of that ties into your hardware and your camera, like whether it has a mechanical shutter or an electronic shutter. Do you get shutter drag, and how, all these things can affect the quality of that recreation. And these are all things that people that are providing deliverables at a more professional level need to be aware of. So we definitely another episode on focusing on that. But I think it's just a good point that the versatility of drones, maybe hopefully we've hammered that home, that, it's a gateway for a reason, and they're extremely versatile, powerful tools. No other vantage point like a drone can give you. And you're always balancing the tool with accuracy, cost, time, what's the intended use. There's, I think for people that are using reality capture tools, it's always an evaluation of what you're trying to do. What are you trying to gather? What is your budgets? What is your accuracy needs? And having a buffet table of these different tools to choose from that's most appropriate for that situation is really important, because I think there's still lots of people in the industry, and I know we're going to talk more about lidar scanning and particularly terrestrial scanning. It's like, that's all we do. I'm like, well, that's great, but it's time consuming. It maybe is not appropriate for every situation. And let's talk about a different methodology for this particular use case, because it's going to be quicker, it's going to be more cost effective, and you still achieve the goals that you're after. So I really enjoy working with clients on finding that balance of what is the right tool. And we're going to dive into that quite a bit more in episodes to come.
Definitely. And it's great that we're talking about all this, because it also is a spectrum. There is this transition that there's everyone like firms that are what I'd call the hardcore lidar and photogrammetry firms. We're talking about people who do state DOT jobs, right? These large firms that have been in photogrammetry since like the 70s, that have done it since it was extremely difficult and cost and, expensive to do, and have this incredible in-depth knowledge. And that scales all the way from those. And there's a market for that and a specific kind of business that should go after that work. And it scales all the way down to, I'm just going to keep up with the roof theme here. The roofer who just wants to take a quick slope measurement and drops their Mavic Air photos into some online software and gets a quick model. Yeah. So that's a huge in between. And so, we'll cover a lot of that in the future. But if it's one takeaway, I think I'd want listeners to get is that, this is where you start diving deeper. This is where you can go from starting simple, but it gets more and more involved, and your knowledge level as you grow will actually dictate as much of what you do as the technology that you pick. It's like with great power comes great responsibility. And I also like more points, more problems. That's my favorite. More points, more problems is what I tell customers all the time. We could do it. We could bring out the terrestrial scanner that can capture all this stuff, but then we have to deal with it, right? You pick up a big meal, now you have to eat it.
Well, the good news about that is the computing capabilities are keeping pace for the most part with these large data sets. And now with AI, I think what used to be a really cumbersome process is getting easier. So there are a few more tools that we want to touch on. We've definitely talked a lot about drones. We have the different types of lidar scanners, where the tripod or terrestrial scanners have been the gold standard for decades, and they are definitely the most accurate tool for collecting lidar data, where we're talking millimeter type accuracies, where mobile lidar solutions are relatively new on the scene and developed, I believe, more from the mining industry, brought a lot of the demand for these types of tools where they're in GPS denied environments and they have these SLAM algorithms to gather information in these really not optimal environments. And that's led to, I would say there's a bit of an explosion happening in the industry with mobile lidar, and how do you use this tool? And I've heard different opinions on the value of the tool and what are the best use cases, and all that is of course being changing every day with the improvement of the technology and accuracy in particular. So my opinion is that it's going to be an extremely valuable tool for the industry in years to come, because of its flexibility to work in dynamic situations where just having a static tripod setup is not ideal for the circumstance, or the areas are larger. Just lots of different scenarios where a mobile scanner is going to be a better tool. But again, you're always weighing something with the constraints of the tool, whether it's the accuracy and the deliverables that you get out of it. But nonetheless, all of that is the pace at which these things are improving is very exciting right now. And I think that mobile is a cool tech. What do you think about that, Scott?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a pretty becoming more and more a heavy mobile lidar user myself. I started with drones, and that's the new side for me, and it's really expanded my business. So I'm a huge mobile lidar fan. Absolutely, it's kind of going through what drones were going through a few years ago. That explosion of cheaper, easier to use, and approaching the quality of traditional methods. The cost, speed, and I'm going to say the good enough factor that it's not going to match what a terrestrial laser scanner can do, but people are learning that often you don't need terrestrial laser scanner quality in the first place, depending on what you're doing. That's really driven it. And so, you want to do a floor plan, you don't need a basic floor plan, accurate to the nearest inch or even a little into sub-inch. You can get that done with mobile lidar. But just to illustrate the difference, if you're looking at like what we'll call like floor or wall deflection studies, if you're chasing a very small thing that moves in tiny increments over a period of time, that's where tripod and terrestrial lidar is still can't be beat. So all about the right use case for the right tool there. But I would say mobile lidar is definitely having its moment, and we're seeing much more of drones combined with mobile lidar to do the entire inside and outside of a building. So that's a cool part of it.
Indeed. All right, couple more real quick on the tool side, because maybe less traditional for folks, but to think about. But nonetheless, it is a way of collecting reality capture. Sonar. I mean, sonar has been around a long time.
Yeah,
but sonar is a way of collecting 3D data.
It is reality capture. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the next ones I think we'll cover here are, to me, the most technical. Maybe it's because I don't, or the most like in the weeds, let's say. Maybe that's just because I fully admit I do not use these on a regular basis. I've worked with a bit of data, but sonar is just so interesting because you're trying to get through something. You're trying to get through the water surface, and that adds a whole different level of complexity and, again, makes it a little more of a niche field. But still incredibly valuable. And again, it's also having its moment. That's a kind of common theme here. There is, and I am not going to pretend to be a sonar expert, but there is a side scan sonar, which is, rather than a giant heavy array that it takes a large boat to pull, can be towed on like a dinghy or a smaller boat. And I am seeing more and more firms that never offered sonar ever, like surveying firms, thanks to side scan sonar, offering it. I wish I could speak more to it, but we got to find a good sonar person to bring on the podcast. That's that would be my answer there.
That would be a great idea. Yeah, and for those in the business, bathymetry is is the term for mapping underwater features. Yeah, a couple more. GPR, which is ground penetrating radar, something that, you know, I've used in the past in my construction career, where they're mapping, say, a slab that has really critical placements of rebar or radiant heating in the floor, and you need to map it out so that you're not accidentally hitting a post-tension cable that if it snaps, oh boy, you're in trouble. So that has been a really important tool for the as-built conditions in the industry. But I know that there's lots of use cases for it too, for identifying underground utilities and things like that. So something that by no means am I a specialist on, but nonetheless a reality capture tool.
Yeah, I put those in the same category of GPR and bathymetry is both pretty specialized still. You know, it still requires some really in-depth working knowledge of how these scanners work. And I haven't seen casual users of either of these software, either of these sensors yet. But it may get there. It is still riding the trend of being more ubiquitous, just like everything else we discussed.
Yeah. Yeah. And thinking of the drone, going back to the drone again, being this, the Swiss Army knife of tools, you can hook up sonar sensors on a drone and drag it in the water and do sonar studies with a drone. And people may not be familiar with that, or they might be like, well, why would you use a drone instead of dragging it up behind a boat? And there's plenty of use cases where that would make sense, accessibility or what have you, to do that. So, you know, there's lots of things with the right drone. You could attach different payloads to do different things.
Mixing and matching is fun too. We're getting into a lot of that where you're combining multiple sensors for a deliverable. But
gas detection, pollution, methane. Oh my gosh, so many options. Yeah, so lots of tools that we've talked about, and there's going to be lots more to talk about with these tools. And obviously, Scott and I are pretty excited about the topics, and we realize we're already at an hour. So we're going to call that a wrap on this episode. And part 2 of this is going to be discussing the types of deliverables, use cases, and what the future holds for, well, also the benefits, a lot of the benefits at these tools. We've touched on many, but lots more to talk about. And we're excited to catch up on the next episode. Any final thoughts, Scott?
You hopefully you've learned a lot about where to even get started here, and I'd say stay tuned for more about what you're actually going to use these tools for.
Yeah, awesome. Good to see you, buddy. We'll see you next time.
Take care.
Okay.